Artificial intelligence. It has been one of the most helpful tools, and yet there's a lot of unknown, namely, what's the future of artificial intelligence as it pertains to the future of propaganda? Yeah, let's talk about that.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Brian is here on the Brian Nichols Show, and thank you for joining us on, of course, another fun-filled episode. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you live from our Cardio Miracle Studios. Are you ready to supercharge your heart health and your energy levels? Well, look no further than Cardio Miracle, the unique blend of both nitric oxide and special ingredients will work to increase nitric oxide levels in your system, meaning it will help promote vital importance for healthy circulation that will help protect your heart, plus opens up your blood vessels, improve blood flow, and lower blood pressure across the board. I am a big fan of Cardio Miracle, so you want to go ahead and get your Cardio Miracle today. Quite literally nothing to lose. They have a 100% money-back guarantee. Head to briannicholsshow.com, click the sponsor link, or go right to cardiomiracle.com. Just use code TBNS for 15% off your order. Cardio Miracle, proud to have them as our studio sponsor here for the Brian Nichols Show, and very excited to have them in my my dietary supplement routine. So go ahead, grab yours, cardiomiracle.com. All right, folks, let's dig into today's episode, and that is discussing all things artificial intelligence, specifically, oh goodness, how's it going to be used by governments and other entities out there in the future of propaganda? To help discuss that and more, returning to the program, Joe Gulesserian. Welcome back to the Brian Nichols Show.
So happy to be here. Thanks for having me on your show again, Brian.
Great to have you back on, Joe. Looking forward to discussing all things AI. Actually, a little scared, if I'm going to be honest, to talk about AI as it goes into the world of propaganda. But before we dig into that, Joe, do us a favor. Go ahead, reintroduce yourself here to the folks on the Brian Nichols Show audience. Maybe missed your last appearance, and what's your whole world in this world of economics?
Well, I wrote the book, The Practical MBA in Economics, that came out actually, it did come out this year. And I used to teach in college for a while. I've ran businesses. I'm an entrepreneur in the health and beauty care, consumer packaged goods industry. And I like to go on the outer edge of life and try everything we can possibly do in this life and see where we end up. So I end up at your doorstep now. And I sat there in my bat cave and I go, oh my, let me see what sinister things I can come up with. And then I go, well, everyone's got a future, right? And even propaganda needs a future too. And, it's getting stale, the same old lies. But now with artificial intelligence, the lies are even more creative. People can take a break, and can't wait to tell you all about it. Yeah.
I'm a little scared to hear about it, but there's a lot of things in the world of AI that have positives, right? Being able to look at massive data sets and being able to understand, consistent themes that are taking place or various patterns that are taking place. But to the flip side of that, right? That also means that nefarious actors are going to be using this as well in the exact same manner. And I guess to kind of start things off here, Joe, right? We look at government, and government is the ultimate monopoly out there, with the monopoly on violence, if we're going to be honest. But now being able to leverage AI, and I dare say they'll go through and make sure they're insulating themselves from various laws and regulations that will inevitably be coming down the pike here as AI becomes more and more prevalent in our society, Joe. So I guess I'm looking at this maybe with my libertarian lens on, worst case scenario, but is it worst case scenario? Am I out of left field here, or is it somewhere in between?
Well, Brian, I just want to let you know that you should let government handle AI, and you can really trust them. They're not going to lie to you. But because without government, and if they're not involved, let's say if we didn't have government, I'll play to your libertarian viewpoints. Without government, we could then cancel something instead of ourselves. We could cancel the words disinformation and misinformation. But wow, this is going to be like propaganda on steroids once AI starts. But it comes with the history, and a lot of people, I do agree with you, though, and all joking aside, I do agree with you that it comes with benefits. One of them, I think, it's going to take away it's going to take us away from mundane tasks. But that's another story. But it really came with. It started in 1895, and it came with Gustave Le Bon, and I believe he was the Frenchman, and he wrote the book The Crowd, and that was about 1895. And who wrote it is some rather interesting individuals from Benito Mussolini, Adolf Hitler, Theodore Roosevelt, Charles Daw, and so where it really starts is where it starts to take effect. America was in the mood of isolationism during the First World War. In fact, that's what Woodrow Wilson ran on. And what happened is, he wanted to get involved in the war for whatever reason. I'm not going to go there. And he created a committee of public affairs. And that's basically your very first, I'll go there. It's your first ministry. That's a code word for America's first Ministry of Propaganda. It was in 1917. And there was Edward Bernays who came into that committee, and he wrote the book called Propaganda later, well after he served under the president. And what happened is his uncle, a lot of people don't know, was Sigmund Freud. So Sigmund Freud knew a couple of things, things about the brain, if you will. And so using a lot of his techniques, that's where he developed his propaganda later, where he used it in New York City, in Madison Avenue, in the advertising industry. And he literally created public relations on his own. So what happened is this committee was created. There's Robert Woolley, there was George Creel, and they're both influential journalists. And this might sound familiar. They gathered intellectuals, journalists, the relative rudimentary filmmaking at the time. I think it's in the Charlie Chaplin era. And they gathered pillars of society. They had these 4-minute men, and they turned around and said, okay, we went from city to city, and, they might have been lawyers or judges or pillars of society and teachers, people you look up to in your communities. And, old school way, they basically said, if you're not for the war, you are, you're basically not patriotic. And they created then the Espionage Act of 1917. They had the Sedation Act of 1918. And they basically, just like the Soviet Union, you snitch on your neighbor. And if you think that person is not patriotic and is not towing the official party line on joining the First World War. Remember, the First World War was going to be the war to end all wars. Well, I don't know if that's true, but they just keep having these wars and no peace, but you get wars. Yeah.
So really quick, at the end of the day, though, we just got to make sure we're on the same page here. It's Woodrow Wilson's fault. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, he really created to keep it practical. Yeah, he did. Right. He lied. But I mean, what's the point of being a politician if you don't lie? I mean, it's terrible. It's an abdication of duty if you don't lie. And so yeah, he did. And just kind of bringing it up to speed. And just before we jump into AI, you saw it in the Vietnam War. People saw it later in the first Gulf War. They actually had a young lady come on and testify before Congress, and she said to the effect that Saddam Hussein's soldiers were stealing babies in incubators in Kuwait. This is in the first Gulf World War. Later, it was found out an ad agency brought her to the Senate or to the investigation to speak, and her father was the ambassador to Kuwait. It was all a fairy tale. And it belonged in the fictional section with Alice in Wonderland and Huckleberry Finn and Santa Claus and all that. And then right now, I mean, the current situation in, the other one is, there's just basically one narrative, and, the propaganda war in Ukraine and Russia is just, it's huge. And now, unfortunately, we are having another conflict as well, too. So it's alive and well, propaganda. But what's going to happen with it is I think AI is going to turn around and kind of give government officials a break where it can start creating all like decks and lines and lines of lies. So this way, they can relax and because, contrary to what we think, government officials should relax, take a break so they have more time for corruption and graft. And, Yeah, that's where we're at. Did I say that? Oh no.
Joe, your sarcasm is not lost on me, but to the audience out there who's listening, right? This obviously is red flags, right? And rightfully so, because we've seen what happens when government gets a newfound power and they're like, ooh, what can I do with this? Because there's nobody to really check that power besides other governments. And I mean, if we're looking at the United States of America, which I would say arguably is one of, if not the most powerful countries / empires of all of human history, when you kind of look at the grand scale of where we are today. And that right there, I mean, look at the weaponized bureaucracies we have: IRS, FBI, CIA, FDA, Department of Education. Go through them all, NSA. They all are pretty much given a blank check, say, go spend what you want. And then they do what they do in The Office, the TV show The Office, where it's budget time. And instead of trying to, actually give that money back, they're like, let's go ahead and buy brand new chairs or brand new copier. No, instead it's like, let's go ahead and buy a couple more F-15s. But that right there speaks to, I think, where your average American would hear this and get terrified, because this is something that I don't know, once the cat's out of the bag, how do you get it back in the bag, especially when it's being enacted by quite literally the world's most powerful government?
Well, it's going to be, you really brought up, it's a very, very deep question you have. It's not going back in the bag. And the question is, the government can write their AI, and then maybe someone else can write another AI, and it might be the government's AI going against, my AI, and my AI can produce another AI, and you won't know where the original AI came up with to fight government's AI. But to keep it in a simple form, I'll give you an example. They call it automated content generation. So I can use images and texts, so on and so forth, and literally set up a studio in 30 minutes, and it'll look like, it's CNN, all professional. And I can show you, for example, satellite pictures of Russian troops invading Romania, so on and so forth. I put it up in my documentary that I created on AI and the future of propaganda. And so it could also show a massive tombstones and so forth. And, people have a 10, 15 second attention span. They'll look at it and they'll get all worked up in a lather. That's all you really need. But the other one that you might find really, there's many, I'll drill down with them, is called social media manipulation. If you think it's manipulated now, wait till you can manipulate the social media, where AI will create all the social media that you need. And it can turn around, and the spook agencies and all those 3-letter agencies that you mentioned, the NSA, the CIA, and so on and so forth, can really, really harness, if you will, the social media, and they can really harness how to control that. And concomitantly with Silicon Valley. In the first episode of Brian Nichols and Joe, we talked about the Kabbalatocracy, and this is like a gift for the Kabbalatocracy. Imagine, just how they can amplify the lies in Hollywood, academia, media, government, the treasury. The treasury, by the way, that's a treasury. Basically, it's a Ponzi scheme passing off as a treasury, but that's another road we can go on. But that being said, you can do that through social media manipulation. Then you can really do targeted messaging. In other words, you can sling stuff at each other, like really, really sling, especially election times. So when elections going on, you can do targeted mudslinging. And what's the point of having an election if you can't throw mud, right? That wouldn't be fun.
Well, let's kind of go into where we are right now in 2023 with right now the tenor of not just in American politics, but let's say it kind of transcends across a lot of different countries. And that is there's this populism that's uprising, this populist wave from the people starting to wake up to seeing, these demagogues out there, they've been preaching a good game, but it's not actually resonating into substantive policy helping me. In America, we see that we're 30 something trillion dollars in debt. The numbers doesn't even seem real. And then we see that we're sending billions, almost trillions of dollars overseas in foreign aid. And meanwhile, Flint, Michigan still has water crisis. I can't drive down the road without hitting 4 potholes that are going to try to total my car. Like the average person is looking at this and saying, enough. And that right there scares me a little bit, because as much as I want to wield populism from a more pro-liberty standpoint to activate people towards my side, I know there are other people like governments who are going to be doing the exact opposite. And goodness, they're they're probably going to leverage AI to go after that populist movement. So, Joe, I mean, how do we as I guess informed citizens stay aware of what's happening and not let the AI tools that are being leveraged by nefarious actors out there impact our use of populism when we're trying to bring it in a pro-liberty way?
It's hard. You got your life, you got your social media, you got your family, so on and so forth. You've got your work, your business, your job, what have you. And can I just tell you the whole thing? It's not just AI. This whole thing about and I'm going to get to AI and elections, but this whole thing about AI, elections, democracy, all the things we hold dear to our hearts. It's just too overwhelming for most people. And that's what government relies on. And I know people like you try and shoot a message of grassroots, become aware. But I went to a baseball game, and it's a sad comment. I mean, look, we're free. We can drink beer, and after the game, take part in other activities and watch the baseball game, just like during the time of the Roman Empire. So they're keeping people's minds busy. And I'm going to go right into the AI here to see how it reconciles with that. And, people are sitting there, what sex am I? How can I further divide the society? Keeps your mind busy. These are just little tiny childish games they're playing. Okay. And I don't even pay any attention to any of that stuff. Right. So what I get into is, let me give you another scenario where AI powered tools create a widespread grassroots support. For example, let's say I'm running for party XYZ, and all of a sudden Brian Nichols sends messages that if you vote for Joe Gulesserian, he's going to sit there and cut back services. I didn't tell you about the part that I'm going to reduce your taxes by 80%. That doesn't matter, because you've got the population wired on government. They're wired in government. Most people, there's enough people who believe that, generally speaking, they're a force for good. I'm not saying they can't be, but right now, I still don't see a Marcus Aurelius, a great last emperor, like an emperor who really has some kind of compassion for people. And it goes outside of America, and it goes outside of the West. There's very little example where you have leaders that actually go, you know what? There's still, Jeffersons or George Washingtons that are there for the people. And so what I'm trying to say is, through AI, I can decimate information. I can spread it all over the place with one particular narrative. And I'll give you another one. Right now, you might want to use this in marketing. They have what they call AI influencers. And you can have anybody. You can have a really legitimate looking person. You can have a very attractive female, and she's sitting there, and she can start spreading narratives on behalf of government officials or on behalf of other parties or on behalf of the spook agencies. You will not know the difference if that's a real woman or if it's not. And so you can spread a lot of stuff, If you, for example, if you really care about women and women's issues, you'll vote for Brian Nichols, not for Joe. Joe is just, he's terrible. He invented the word misogynist,
Joe, we're talking about AI, and we're talking about propaganda and misinformation. I would feel remiss not to talk about what's happening right now over in the Middle East, over in the Israel-Gaza Hamas conflict. And I've seen this on social media, right? Lots of misinformation, lots of propaganda on both sides. I hate being that person on both sides, but truly we've seen it come out on both sides, things that have been proved verifiably false, or things that have been shown from 30 years ago being presented as fact as today. So do you see kind of what we're talking about here already being utilized in a lot of these conflicts?
It's very hard to say. It's a very, very good point you're making, Brian. For example, and I don't want to go off base. I want to stick to the AI in this particular situation with what's going on in the Middle East with the Hamas and Israel. What you're seeing is, I could really plant words in Netanyahu's mouth. I can plant words in the Hezbollah's mouth. I can plant words in Palestinian mouths, and you won't know the difference, right? It's very, very hard to detect. I mean, most people do not sit there and look at a video and go, is Joe really saying that? Or is Brian really saying that? They just assume it's natural and authentic. Those days are going to be gone, right? And you're going to need some real powerful tools to do fact checking to make sure that what was said was authentic. I could stage, for example, I said earlier, there's the techniques that they use. I could stage an automated content generation. I could stage a complete invasion where I'm not saying this is true. I could stage one and say that, guess what? There's been a complete invasion of Tel Aviv, or conversely, there's a complete invasion, all kinds of dead people in Gaza. They've gone street to street, so on and so forth. And they're lying. In fact, I saw one video online that CNN made, and they told the reporter to lie down and kind of stage the whole thing and say just the missiles just went off close to you and blah blah blah. But there's something very interesting. What you can do with AI, and you might find it quite interesting. It's called translation and language translation, and it's really an area of AI where you turn around. And I'm going to go back to the States for a second because you dragged me into this. I think all these wars are terrible. I feel bad for people suffering on both ends. I really do. So what I would say is, let's say you're in the United States, right? It is turned into, I don't know if it's the melting pot. It's turned into, was certainly arguably a multicultural society. So what I'm trying to say is, when I want to divide the country some more, AI is so intelligent. They go, well, it can do it in different languages and different subcultures. And, you can do psychographics by section by section, by postal code, zip code by zip code. And what I'm trying to say here is there might be nuances within subcultures. Okay. For example, not all people from Latin America think the same. And they have their factions as well. So what I can do is I can start using AI to send messages in 11 to 15 or 100 different languages, if you will, within the United States to further separate the tribes. You need to separate them because therefore government comes in with this cosmic vision and they turn around. And of course, they're going to resolve it. And separating them, and it's called really language translation and localization. You can do that in elections, going back to elections, and you can generally do it if you want to create unrest, right? And you want to pit people against each other. You want, the idea now is what we're seeing, unfortunately, is the renaissance of tribalism. And you're seeing it everywhere. And so that's
awesome.
one area there.
Joe, I appreciate it. I just looked at the clock. We're already hard pressed for time. I don't know how that always happens on our show. We go really fast here, and then all of a sudden I look at the clock and I'm getting told by the studio here, I got to get going. But no, otherwise, Joe, this has truly been a great conversation. And I think it opens a lot of eyes to folks who are maybe not aware of what's happening in the world of AI or how quickly it's being adopted by a lot of nefarious actors out there. Not for our benefit, but to the detriment of society. And it's on us to not just be aware of it, but also I would dare say, and this is my challenge to the audience, is to not just be aware of it, but start using AI to your advantage. Like counter the propaganda with propaganda by God. I think that, that's on us. We talk about setting narratives versus responding to narratives. Go out, start spreading some actual narratives, but don't go into the propaganda world of spreading falsehoods and misinformation for political gain, but start hitting people with the truth and use AI tools to your benefit. That's kind of my final thoughts for today, Joe. What do you have for us on your end?
Well, on my end, the one part I was going to add to that, I just want to put on, I want to end with a positive note, right? Because, I paint these dystopian ideas. I think I'm reading Brave New World too many times. But, and my thought is this, you could create an AI program that would fact check the hell out of all these fact checkers right now. Because those fact checkers, forget it. So what if you could hold them to truth? Okay. And if you could hold those fact checkers to truth, what if AI was so intelligent and it's getting there to 190, 230 IQ, goes right through the media, goes right through the government, goes, this is true, 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 lie, lie, lie. And so that's the positive end of fact checking, so on and so forth. it can, on the other end, it could also be used to manipulate the stock market too, right? And consumer sentiment, stock market sentiment. You can create false narratives, bring down the stock market, if you got short positions. But yes, I do think if you start writing algorithms that just absolutely hold everybody to account, I think that's a very positive thing with AI in the future of propaganda. And you made me think of that. You always get my head rolling all the time, Brian.
There's worse things, Joe. I've been told many times there's worse things that I get going. But otherwise, Joe, thank you for joining us here on the show. It's been a great conversation. And truly, I think this is something that we're going to continue to talk about as we move forward with the advancement of AI. Hard to imagine that not even 11 months ago, like ChatGPT was quite literally in its infancy. And here we are, fast forward to the end of 2023, and we have a bazillion AI tools that go into like text and video and like art and photos. It's mind-blowing to see we've gotten to a point where AI is not just going to be part of the conversation, it's creating the conversation. So this is something, right, that we got to stay aware of, and we obviously got to keep talking about, and having folks like Joe on the show is obviously one of the best ways to go about doing that. So Joe, with that, for folks who want to continue the conversation, want to hear more about the scary stuff coming down the pike, where can they go ahead, support you, find you, follow you, all that kind of fun stuff?
Well, I'm hiding right now after doing this show, right? So I'll be hiding for at least the next 30, 60 days. But when I'm finished hiding, I'm being facetious here. There's if you look up Practical MBA on YouTube, you can find my channel there. I can be found under my name, Joe Gulesserian, on Twitter. I can be found on LinkedIn, and of course, I'm in Instagram as well. So I'm not too hard to find. And of course, if you look up my book on Amazon, you put Practical MBA, and I come up on Amazon. And away it goes.
Good stuff, Joe. It was a pleasure having you on again, and we'll make sure we continue this dialogue. And folks, by the way, I mentioned it. Joe mentioned it. He was on the show before, so if you are joining us here on the YouTubes, stick around. I'm gonna have that pop up right about here, so you can go ahead, click that, and continue the conversation there. Otherwise, audio version of the show, YouTube Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, you can go ahead and find the program. And also, video version of the show, we're on YouTube, Rumble, we're on Ben Swan's Sovereign, SOVREN, which, by the way, if you're seeing that today on Sovereign, congratulations. You're seeing it before anybody else as a Sovereign exclusive. That's my gift to you. And yes, we upload our entire episodes over on X.com, formerly Twitter. Really great engagement over there. Thank you, Elon. Appreciate it. And folks, if you want to go ahead and join the most amazing, truly wonderful email list that's out there in terms of how to better your sales skills overnight, subscribe to the morning sales huddle email I send out once a week, ballpark or so. Head over. You can subscribe over at briannicholsshow.com. And while you're there, go ahead and leave us a 5-star rating and review. I greatly appreciate it, and I know others do as well, because it helps them realize what value they're getting from the Brian Nichols Show and all, 777, I think it is, other episodes here of the program, including our past conversation there with Joe, which, yes, will be popping up right now on YouTube's, or if you're joining us here on the audio versions, head over to your show notes. Link will be right there. And by the way, yes, please support our studio sponsor, Cardio Miracle, the best heart health supplement in the world. Link also in the show notes. Joe Gulesserian, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. And folks, thank you for joining us. Yes, we will talk to you guys next week. With that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Joe Gulesserian. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.